Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, everyone, to give the opportunity for me to speak. The common interest in the theme is psi and consciousness. So, what is psi? One way to define psi, is my personal definition, is the paranormal phenomena which cannot be explained by physics. Therefore, if we want to understand psi, by definition, we cannot use physics. Physics is a wrong tool for the job. We need a new paradigm. So what is the new paradigm? So we need to try to explore alternative to physics. Yeah. So for building paradigm, let's review how we actually build paradigm. We build paradigm by using metaphors. Yeah. Metaphor as conceptual tools to understand the world. If we are blind people, we cannot see the elephant. We need concepts like fans, like pillars, like tubes to make sense of an elephant. So we need metaphor. What we should know is that at different stage of human civilization, we have different metaphors at the time. For example, in Newton's time, our understanding of the universe is a clock-like machine, because at the time the high tech is clock, watches. When the human society was electrified, we had a new concept. The concept is called electricity. Yeah, so we have a new concept to build a model of the reality. And we use concepts like charged particles. So electrically charged particles. The nuclei is positively charged, the electron is negatively charged. We have a new concept tool to build the models. Nowadays is a different age. We call it digital age. We have a new set of concepts, which concepts are actually also tools for us to build models, build paradigms. So nowadays, we are exposed to concepts like computer, big data, cloud computing, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. Those are the new tools we can use to make sense of the world. Let's review some couple of important concepts. A computer is actually very simple. Fundamentally, it's just a switch, actually. It's a switch between two states, on and off. So we have input, which is on and off, and output also zeros, ones. It can be expressed as zeros, ones, and basically is two opposing states. Very simple. However, with sophisticated programming, the simple switch can do amazing things. So initially, it can only handle numbers and then handle text, images, sound. Nowadays, it's multimedia. It can do amazing things, but fundamentally, it's a basically switch. A big number of switches get together, and you can do amazing things. So virtual reality is a new concept. We are exposed, actually, I believe in not too distant future, the boundary between virtual reality and the real reality are going to be blurred. So we can simulate, we can produce computer graphics which are so real and very close to reality. Yeah. So those new concepts give us new ideas to model the world. And therefore, some thinkers began to think, actually, is the universe can be seen as a computer simulation. Yeah, the first person is actually a German computer scientist. He's one of the major pioneers. He made the first program computer in 40s, actually. In 1969, he started wondering if the entire universe is being computed on a computer. Yeah. No one take him notice until 90s. John Wheeler is a renowned physicist. He began to think the same way. There's a famous phrase called "it from bit." All things physical are information theoretical in origin. And Edward Fredkin is another American computer scientist. And he speculated further the computer actually may be outside the universe. He called the place other. There is this place other that hosts the engine that runs the physics. Yeah. So those are the pioneers of this simulation hypothesis. Of course, in the same period of time, this popular media start to explore this idea to make sci-fis. There's all sorts of books, but the famous movie is called The Matrix, which popularized the idea of simulated reality, these concepts. Recently, there's also TV series like Westworld, Human, explore the same idea. So the idea of simulated reality is getting more popular, even in the mainstream now. Let's watch
what is life for
this video.
As I get older, I find that question to be confusing or troubling. Particularly when you see the advancement of something like video games. Like say 40 years ago, the most advanced video game would be like Pong, where you had like two rectangles and a dot. But now you can see a video game that's photorealistic, and millions of people playing simultaneously, and you see where things are going with virtual reality. Then eventually those games will be indistinguishable from reality. They'll be so realistic, you will not be able to tell the difference between that game and the reality as we know it. How do we know that that didn't happen in the past? And that we're not in one of those games ourselves?
Tonight's topic is the universe a computer simulation? We've got some highly thoughtful, talented, respected people to weigh in on this.
The more I learned about later on as a physicist, the more struck I was that when you get deep down under the hood about how nature works, how can I be sure that this mathematical reality isn't actually some kind of game or simulation?
In my research, I had found this very strange thing, error correcting codes. Error correcting codes are what make browsers work. So why were they in the equations that I was studying about quarks and leptons and supersymmetry? And that's what brought me to this very stark realization that I could no longer say that people like Max were crazy.
So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos.
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
We seem to see a pattern forming over here. Our universe is pixelated, a matter isn't as real and as solid as we hoped. Our reality can be shut down, and we are ultimately informational, virtual beings so comparable to a computer program that it isn't a big jump to accept that we are possibly, no, we are probably living in a computer simulation.
Sold a gun to a murderer so you can play video games?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you spend all day shuffling words around, you can make anything sound bad, Morty. Here, check this out.
What the hell? Where am I?
55 years. Not bad, Morty.
Okay, I'll stop here. Actually, yeah.
What is life?
Sorry. We can see the idea is getting more popular. However, it's remain purely a speculation. Yeah. To my mind, if you want to make it into a theory or even just a hypothesis, there's a number of fundamental questions you need to answer. For example, where is the computer? Where does it come from? What is it made of? How is it built? what are its properties? When we buy a computer, we ask what's the memory, what's the processing speed, so what's the property? And of course, ultimately a big question, who is the programmer? So the model I'm trying to develop is try to resolve those questions. So try to study what's the, if, suppose there is a supercomputer runs the universe, and then what's the origin? What's the fundamental structure and composition? What's the nature and property? And what's the dynamics and the application? So that's the model I'm trying to present. I have only one promise. So there is a source mind. Because consciousness is a word which is used by different people, meaning different things. It's very confusing. I'm trying to use a different words called source mind. Really inspired by Max Planck. So he says, in regards consciousness as fundamental, matter is derivative from consciousness. So we must assume the existence of consciousness, an intelligent mind. The mind is the matrix of all matter. Yeah. So this is the approach which is opposite to physics. In physics, we're trying to derive consciousness from matter. Yeah. In this model, I'm trying to develop matter from consciousness. So the conscious is the fundamental existence. Yeah. However, consciousness is actually difficult to handle because fundamentally it's actually non-dual. Non-dual means you cannot describe it. It's not a subject you can describe. In duality, you have subject-object, and then you describe the object. But consciousness is actually non-dual, so there's no way you can describe it. We normally describe it negatively. We cannot see what it is. We can only see what is not. So we use timeless, dimensionless, spaceless, infinite, those kind of description. Yeah. However, because I'm trying to make a model, I have to define it some way. Therefore, I give it a working definition. What is consciousness? I define it as potential power to conceive, to perceive, to be self-aware. Basically, it's abstract power to create, to experience. And well, of course, you have a sense of self. I am. This is I am before I am something else, Abraham. So this is the working definition of consciousness, based on which I'm building a computer. Yeah. I don't have time to go through how I actually construct this computer. But basically, because the creativity of consciousness, the consciousness digitalize self. So it becomes computable. The computation, the output of the computation is the universe. So this is the basic concepts. Therefore, I define the potential power, which is consciousness. I call it a void, zero, and projected power of the source mind. I call it one. So basically, it's the polar opposite of potentiality and actuality in abstract term. So you have opposing states. By doing so, we actually can create a time. Yeah. I don't have time to actually don't have time to go through this, but just briefly, you have projected consciousness and non-projected consciousness. And at the present moment, you create a switch. Yeah. Once you have a switch, you have a computer, basically, switching between the two polarized the states. Therefore, in this model, I can actually define time. What is time? Yeah. Time has never been defined. It cannot be defined by physics. In physics, it's just t. It's a parameter. Past and the future is the same t, and the present is the same t. It's not obviously sufficient because we experience present moment. It's a very special moment. It's very different from past and or future. And in physics, past, future are symmetrical. In this case, actually, the future is unprocessed data. The past is the processed data. So the present moment is the moment where computation happens. That's why it's so special. Yeah. Because the irreversibility of the computation, that means you cannot take the output back into the input. Therefore, the past cannot go back to future. So that's why the time is irreversible, actually. It's one way because computation is one way. That's one of the property of computation. Yeah. So what is the space, actually? The space is basically output of a computation. Before computation, there isn't a space. Yeah. By programming a space, you output a three-dimensional display made of pixels. So space is actually a processing output of this computation. Of course, once you have a space, you have a display, and you can output contents into the space. The content is the universe. I want to stress that the computer actually is not in this physical space. I call it a Platonic computer because it's in the Platonic realm. Plato had the idea that everything physical is actually a poor copy of the Platonic realm. We have an apple here, physical apple. We also have an appleness, the pure appleness, perfect apple in the Platonic realm. So I borrow this sort of logic, which means because we have a physical computer here, we should have a Platonic computer, which is more real, more perfect, more powerful. Yeah. By switching between the polar opposite, you can compute. If you can compute, you can produce the universe. Yeah. So to summarize the metacomputics model, we presume the existence of an ongoing operating computer in Platonic realm. The Platonic computer is made by, of, with, from consciousness. So consciousness projects itself and become a one. Before projection is zero. So these are all made by consciousness. So therefore the consciousness is hardware as well as software for the computer. And consciousness is defined as a power to conceive, to perceive, and to be self-aware, and is the most fundamental, irreversible existence. Space and its contents arise from consciousness by the computational process. So that's the basic summary of the model. I don't have time to go into the detail. I said we need a new paradigm, and this is an attempt to make the shift. So in traditional physics, we have matter as a primary, and we use reductionism, and we use mathematics as a tool. In a new paradigm, I'm suggesting we use consciousness as primary, and we use holism, systematic approach, and we use computation as a tool. What we will discover is that with a new paradigm, we have new perspective. From new perspective, we have a new understanding of the universe, and all the problem we face in physics as well as psi can be easily dealt with. For example, the law of nature is basically it's an expression of the programming. Yeah. When apple detached from the branch, it's programmed to fall at 9.8 meters per second square. So it's a parameter in the programming. And the magnets, well, physics still cannot explain why magnets attract, but actually it can be attracted just by programming it. Yeah, Newton says the universe is actually a stage. What we are discovering here is actually behind the stage, we also have a backstage. The backstage is the codes, the computation process. Yeah. So if physics is a program, in theory, the program can be altered, can be suspended temporarily, and therefore you have phenomena like levitation or things like that. And the mechanism, I don't have time to play the video, but you can actually create mechanism by mind. And this some of the experiments performed in China. So the physical property can be seen as a result of programming. For example, in this case, those are basically images, but they appear to have a physical property purely because they are programmed to do so. So it can be conceivable, actually, we experience this table as a solid only because it's programmed not to allow my hand to go through it. In this case, the ball, when it hits the boundary or other balls, it has to bounce. Yeah. So it can be programmed to have the physical property. Without the programming, it's basically a set of image. So this universe could be just a set of image programmed to have different properties, like liquid, solid, gas. Of course, if the solidity is basically programmed, then some people may be able to switch it off. In this case, you can sort of moving objects through solid. Yeah. There's many things we cannot explain in physics, like entanglement. Why things entangle, why particles entangle. Two particles light years away, because it's background, the backstage, it's programmed to entangle. It's like two dots on the computer screen. If the program entangle it, of course it entangles. It's very easy to explain. Entanglement is actually widespread phenomena in nature. Polar bears can travel hundreds of miles to find a female in the mating season. It doesn't make sense. It cannot have any sense. Smell, it cannot. So it has to be programmed somehow. And if it's just a set of data, of course, if you change the coordinates of the data, you can transfer it from one place to another. In this case, you can teleport. Teleport is basically change the coordinate of the objects. This is an experiment. We have a psychic in China who can transport money. Recently, we did some experiment also, ask him to transport the GPS tracker. We can actually track the movement of the object. Yeah. By the way, he has to return the money for some reason. He can't keep it. But every time he can transport tens of thousands renminbi. Yeah. In this model, we suggest there's two kinds of existence. Yeah. One existence is the phenomenological existence, which is the universe we experience. The other existence is what's behind it, which is this computer with all the data programming in it. So therefore, the way we perceive the world is actually decoded. Yeah. The objective existence of the universe is actually a data. Yeah. It's like you scan a barcode. Yeah. Before you scan it, its barcode is nothing sensible. Once you decode it, you have an image. I think this is how we actually experience the world. And we decode what we observe, and we process it in a Platonic computer, and we output using our senses. In this case, in normal living, we can actually use our eyes to project what is processed. And in terms of psi, for example, you can project it into a ping pong ball. Inside the surface of ping pong ball, in gas field experiment. And in other cases, you don't have to project into the space. You can have a mental space also. Yeah. So the key is actually you can access the data because everything is already there, past, the present, future. So if you can access the data and you decoded data, you can have all sorts of experience, including the dream, of course.
Could you possibly sum up in the next few minutes?
Yeah,
please?
okay. Yeah, okay. Right. Another implication is that it's actually a multiverse because the computer can be built by dividing the space-time differently. But different number of division, we have a different computer running at a different speed, clock speed. So we have multiple computers operating at a different speed. We produce different universe, which is multiverse. And we, as a human, actually, we exist at all levels. But most times we only experience the physical. But psychic people, they actually experience multi-layers together. They live their life as a superposition. So they experience parallel universe. I don't do on this anymore, but so in this model, how we explain psi, the condition for producing psi is the activation of a higher consciousness because we exist at all levels. The so-called higher self has to be activated. and the higher self has to interact with the computer. And another condition is the program for law of physics has to be locally, temporarily disabled. That's why we cannot reproduce psi in labs. In scientific labs, the law of physics, the program for law of physics is too strongly reinforced. It cannot be switched off, and therefore it cannot be reproduced. Yeah. One more thing I want to just show is one of the favorite experiments, because I have a PhD in material science. This is a particular interest to me. For material, if you pull it apart, break it, you need a tensile machine, and the material will experience necking before breaking. If you look at the microstructure, the grain is going to be elongated. This is not play somehow, but this psychic, he can actually break it somehow, psychically. And so in this case, if you examine the microstructure, there's no elongation, no deformation. So how the hell he break it? I hope some open-minded skeptics actually can reproduce this, because it's going to be very interesting. The result is the process, because the process cannot be observed by scientists. Yeah, if you observe it, it doesn't happen. He cannot break it. All you need to do is to prepare the sample, and I can deliver to him, get him to break it, and we can send it back to exam. And it's going to be very interesting, because the result is the process. You don't have to witness the process. If he cheats, there has to be deformation. Yeah, so Adrian, are you interested? Repeat this. For further information, I have a paper published in American Philosophical Association, and we can look into that. And I also have a website. There's more information on the website, including some presentations. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.